an ongoing entity, and that's back when MIT developed the Industrial Liaison Program that Ed alluded to. I've even looked back at some U of M history books and see that U of M started some of its industry programs back in the 1950s. But one thing that happened, I mean, still by and large, you know, as Ed said, universities did federal research work and federally funded research work. Essentially, the ownership of that intellectual property post-World War II accrued to the federal government. And essentially, by about 1980, 30,000 patents had developed out of federally funded research at universities, and only about 1,500 of those had ever really seen the light of day. So in 1980, probably one of the most enlightened, I would argue one of the most enlightened pieces of legislation to ever come out of the US Congress, but one that probably most people on the street have no idea about, is called the Bayh-Dole Act. And it essentially changed the presumption of title on that all of that federally funded research on university campuses and said, you know what? Obviously the federal government is not getting this stuff out into the marketplace. So let's let the ownership accrue to the universities and let them find marketable opportunities to commercialize these ideas and get them into real world products and services. And it's just amazing what that changed and what that unlocked. And they don't have, you know, it takes a while to accrue some of this data, but for fiscal year 2006, almost 5,000 licenses were generated. If you think back, all those years before, only 1,500 had, and in 1 year alone, nearly 5,000. That's about 100 times annualized increase in the amount of commercialization that was going on. And since 1980, and again, this doesn't include the last couple of years, 5,700 startup companies have spun out of universities around the country. So this was great, right? And universities were loving it, and people were getting, you know, very excited, as Ed alluded to, of this illusion that these tech transfer offices would just become ATM machines, right, for the universities. And everybody could get rich quick, and there obviously were a few examples of amazing things that did happen, Gatorade usually being the one that people point out, of really accruing a lot of money to the University of Florida over the years. But also everyone kind of forgot a few things. Like number one, the Bayh-Dole Act did not apply to industrially funded research at universities. So it wasn't that the presumption of a title, if you were partnering with a Ford Motor or with another company, necessarily accrued to the university. And obviously most companies kind of took exception to the fact that they would fund research. And wait a minute, you're saying we wouldn't own the rights to that research? But universities forgot about that, literally, and that caused a lot of friction, continues actually to cause a lot of friction in universities working with industry. Another thing, too, is folks like me, these corporate relations office developed at many universities, but they were housed in the development organization. And only when I took this job 9 years ago or so, because again, I'm an engineering background, I thought development meant product development, but I learned it's a euphemism for fundraising. So be careful if anyone from the development office calls you. And that just struck me as wrong and odd, and we'll get to that in a second of what really happened at U of M then when I came into that role. But a few schools, U of M included, did start experimenting with a different approach, essentially, to corporate relations. And actually, in the last few years, industry-funded research at universities has started to creep back up again, which I think is a good sign. So what has really changed? And I'm not keeping up here, am I? Well, hopefully you can read fast. What has really changed in corporate relations? So what we did at U of M, and actually only a few schools around the country have really done this to date, but I think it will be changing over the next 10 years or so. We've taken a more all-inclusive approach to corporate relations and really looked at all the ways the university can interact with the corporate world and how we can bring value back and forth. So we're essentially integrating all of the different functions and the different programs that the university has that could be of interest to industry. The Business Engagement Center, or Corporate Relations, has really now become kind of the front door for those interactions, or if you will, kind of the sales office of the university, although as Ed said, we don't charge you for the right of selling to you. But really, you know, to be an advocate for both sides on making connections and understanding where both sides could get value out of a partnership. It's really a strong part of our mission now to promote economic development, and I would argue that that means, in a very broad sense, promoting our connections with industry. Certainly tech transfer is a big part of that, but it's not the only part of that. You know, the university needs to be well connected, particularly to the companies here in Michigan, to help make them successful. And essentially, I mean, I get judged on maximizing the engagement on all these different levels. So what does that really mean? This is kind of my to-do list every day, is really to engage companies and increase the engagement in all of these different areas. So certainly the single biggest product, as it were, of the university is the students that we educate. And so certainly the recruiting relationships with industry are a very critical part to what we do. Joint research is very important, and the Ford Alliance is a great example of that for us right now. Student team projects that are part of the curricular experience for students, part of the learning experience, and getting real-world problems from industry really enhances that experience at the university. Licensing technology, professional development offerings that we have to help educate practicing engineers or business people out in the marketplace. And obviously the university should be pretty good, should have a comparative advantage at delivering education to people, and companies can tap into that by sending their own employees back in. We have a lot of specialized labs and facilities that actually are open on a fee basis to outsiders to use, and it's a very cost-effective way for particularly small companies often who don't have the money to invest in some of these sophisticated laboratory environments for them to be able to use that for their own purposes. You know, we often get involved in helping to coordinate speakers coming to campus and being part of the intellectual exchange or serving in advisory roles. We do care and watch about the vendor relationship, because obviously the university buys a lot of stuff, particularly from certain industries, scientific equipment or computer companies or furniture companies, and obviously that's an important part of the relationship, and we just try and be cognizant of that. And we do still care about the gifts. That is still something we are trying to work on. The irony has been, and we started this evolution in the College of Engineering Corporate Relations about 9 years ago, at the university level about 2 years ago. The irony has been is gifts from industry are up 70% since we started not focusing on the gifts and instead focusing on the value. And you kind of go, duh, you know, it makes sense, right? But, you know, again, most places around the country still haven't clued into this. But, so it's really, it proves it's more of a win-win. I mean, you know, and companies, that same lesson, right? If you focus on the value, you know, the financial aspects will follow. So, the Business Engagement Center itself is a little bit over a year old. We first announced it in December of '07. I really spent much of the first half of last year getting us up and running. We moved into a new physical space near the center of campus on South University in March. We had a nice open house event with over about 400 plus attendees in May. We completed our staffing, and we're really up and running now. We got a nice website. We just started a quarterly e-newsletter to our business partners. It goes out to about 3,000 industry contacts. Some of the other enhancements, we are co-located with the Office of Tech Transfer, which has proven to be really better than Ken Nisbet, who's the Executive Director of Tech Transfer, and myself even envisioned. It's just created a lot of nice synergies between our operations. The university reduced the indirect cost rate for research with industry. We used to disadvantage industry research by charging a slightly higher rate than we did the federal government, and now we've leveled that playing field. As Ed said, partly to symbolically send the message that we want faculty doing both kinds of research. There shouldn't be a separation between the two. We now also, in select situations, can cost share on industry research, which we used to not be able to do. We're trying to get better at some of the backroom processes. You know, we still need to get the attorneys involved, but we try to mitigate the damage that does to both sides. We're giving a higher profile to these industry engagements, and folks like Mary Sue Coleman, the president, and Steve Forrest, the vice president, actually will send congratulatory letters and emails to faculty who've done some really exciting work in industrial engagements. We're working on a much better search engine and expertise database so that folks from the outside can more easily find an expert at the university. I mean, there are thousands of faculty, so it's, even for myself, it's not an easy thing to do, nor to keep track of. It's a moving target, right? Faculty interests change and evolve over time. So we think we have a good mechanism now with some of the improvements in IT technology to keep a better handle on that. The other thing, this economic development mission we're taking very seriously, and we really have an enhanced focus on interacting with the small business community. And in a second,